look at the report, it pointed out that the Kenyan textile and clothing industry contributed only 0.6% of Kenya's GDP and 6% of the total manufacturing sector's GDP. Now, how can we increase this contribution of the textile industry to Kenya's economy? I just want Mars to start on that. And for Michael, I want to get to know how you feel that 6%, and you're a part of the fashion Kenyan industry. How do you feel when you see this small number in such reports? But let's just start off with you, Mars.
Okay, on the issue of increasing, growing the percentage, as it were. So we have to look at the challenges that manufacturing faces in the country as of now. So the high cost of manufacturing, particularly with regards to the cost of electricity or the cost of labor, those are challenges that manufacturing sector as a whole are facing in the country of Kenya. So one of the steps at least would be for the government to look at what policy measures they can put in place to address the cost of electricity, the cost of utilities, and in order to make Kenya more competitive with regards to manufacturing as a whole. But now, particularly to the textile sector, we're seeing in our experience, for example, we're working in a market in Nairobi's Eastlands area known as Uhuru Market. It houses about 1,000 traders who are operating individually, and they are mostly textile manufacturers. And it is mostly an informal sector as well. So Kenya has very many pockets of these informal production or manufacturing clusters across the entire country. And one of the ways we think that the government can start to improve the statistic for textile manufacturing in the country is seeing ways to include informal manufacturing clusters into the wider conversation of meeting the demand for Kenyan produce. Yeah, so that is one possible way that we can start addressing this statistic and increasing the percentage.
Okay. What about you, Michael? Seeing such a small percentage being contributed to the GDP, and being someone who's in the Kenyan fashion industry, how do you feel about this number?
Just to turn into what Maz said about supporting informal manufacturers in the local manufacturing industry, I feel like that's a huge opportunity for the Kenyan government, because there's a lot of innovation within these informal manufacturing co-ops. A lot of them, especially with like textiles and even jewelry, they work with like very, very rudimentary tools and materials, and they're able to do as much as possible. Can you imagine what they're capable of doing? You know, if they're supported with like, you know, perhaps small loans to improve their equipment, or training initiatives from other, like from industry leaders in other countries that are like huge textile exporters. There's there's a lot of potential as it pertains to the informal textile manufacturing industry, I think. Aside from that, I think that the other thing that we need to do also as Kenyans is really hone into our ability to, because like in my experience as a local designer, is that we have a lot of like tools and techniques that aren't really explored, because we really want to create something that's like mass produced or like very easily replicable, but we also have like unique things that we do that, you know, could drive a lot of revenue for export, because in the global market, the things that we do that are not readily available globally. So I think that that's another opportunity that we can begin to look at.
Okay, great. Still on you, Michael. Now, the report stated that the local fashion designers are often forced to import textiles due to local production of textiles not being able to meet demands both in scale and variety, which is something I feel like you mentioned in terms of when it comes to scale and variety now. Is this something you're facing as a designer? And if you are, how exactly are you dealing with this challenge?
So to start with, I am a jewelry designer, so textiles aren't really my core concern at this particular point. However, that's something that I work with on occasion, and how I work around that, and through, you know, the great British Council and the program that I did with them, the Creative DNA program. I was really we were really encouraged to upcycle and recycle instead of from because we already have the market is flooded with a lot of textiles from from the mitumbas, and instead of discarding those, we upcycle them. We use natural dyes. We use new techniques, like the techniques where we cut up all of these old fabrics and make new ones and make mats out of those. So there is potential also to use what is discarded locally to create something new and to add value to something that was discarded in mitumba.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Michael. Now, there is a great need for the government to realign the growth strategy of Kenya's fashion industry in order for it to reach its full potential. What are some of the ways they can achieve this, apart from decreasing sales of mitumba clothing? I actually wanted Mars to take on this. Let's see if he is with us. Mars, can you hear me? I think he's still loading. So Michael, I'll just jump back to you and talk about how COVID-19 has majorly affected the fashion industry as a whole, making fashion business owners to turn to online platforms. Now, one of the emphasis in the report is that there should be an establishment of e-commerce strategy in order for the industry to be sufficient. But how exactly will an e-commerce strategy achieve this on your end?
So with an e-commerce, having an e-commerce website, first of all, instantly expands the borders of your customer base, because prior to, without having an e-commerce website, you could only sell locally, whereas if you have a website, you can sell internationally. Now, with that, you already have instantly expanded your consumer base. And once you start selling internationally, there's also potential for higher revenue, because you could price your products at a higher price. However, I think what with that advantage comes the additional cost of shipping, which I think is something that could be that the government perhaps could support small businesses with, or some of these shipping companies could support small businesses with. I feel like that would be a really advantageous relationship. However, having an online business was it instantly expands your consumer base to a global audience.
100%. Now, Maz, we had lost you for a second. I don't know if you're with us now.
Apologies.
Yes, I had a question for you and you disappeared for a second, so I'll just go back to it. We're looking at the great need for the government to realign the great strategy for Kenya's fashion industry in order for it to reach its full potential. Now, what are some of the ways they can achieve this, apart from decreasing the sales of mitumba clothing?
Thank you. That's a great question. It's a question that we like to think about a lot in the office as part of our work, actually. So we're thinking that what we need to see is the strengthening of the entire value chain. And when we're talking about strengthening the entire value chain, we're looking at, for example, policy, the required policy to make the textile industry flourish in the country. We're also looking at structural support of the sector, particularly of representative bodies, so that we can have representative bodies that are able to lobby on behalf of the practitioners very well. And then also we're looking at addressing the challenges of sourcing materials locally. So whether this is, and the government has made great strides in at least trying to address this challenge with the recent revival of Rivertex, but there's still a lot of work that can be done with regards to cotton, with regards to other alternative fabrics that local practitioners are starting to look at as alternatives to cotton as well. So this is another thing that the government needs to start thinking about. How can we strengthen the ability for local practitioners to source locally? And then lastly, with the option of importing, because very many practitioners in the country are now importing fabric to produce. But then when we're talking about importing, then there's a whole lot of taxes attached to that entire process that then make the import cost extremely high and the cost of parts extremely high. And what that leads to is that very many producers in the Kenyan market are then pricing themselves out of the market because their initial cost of production was already very high. So if the government can also try and look at the ways in which we can bring down the cost of importation of fabric, that would be a very strong way to address the strengthening of the sector. And then lastly, we also have very many thoughts about how we can improve the linkage between sector and curricula and strengthen the link between sector and institutions of higher learning. And the Technical and Vocational Training Authority is already designing programs, or at least is already having thoughts around how the people who come out of vocational training institutes are able to respond to the needs of the market without any additional training or without further training. So they're able to slot in immediately after training. They're able to get into the sector and work and produce goods of high quality and meet the demands of the Kenyan public.
Finally, the United States is currently the biggest buyer of Kenya's textile and clothing exports. Now, how can we exactly diversify our export markets on textile and apparel's front?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, and I didn't necessarily know how to approach it. But one of the ways we were seeing is that currently the reason why the United States is a big purchaser of Kenyan textile produce is because it's covered under the AGOA Act. Now the AGOA Act is subject to review, particularly with the United States keen on shifting from regional trade agreements to bilateral trade agreements. So in the event that, and this is an ongoing discussion between the Kenyan government and the United States government, in the event that such a bilateral trade agreement is reached, then we will see that there will be a continued interaction between Kenya and the United States with regards to textile purchases. Now, when we're talking about how we can diversify our market instead of just having the United States, this now comes into play when we start thinking about how do we engage in trade agreements with other, like for example, with the EU or with China, or with even other regional blocks within the continent. Like how does EAC or Kenya start engaging with ECOWAS in terms of dealing in textiles or dealing in sourcing of textile and leather inputs for the production of goods. So we can start to look at other regional blocks as opposed to just the United States of America as a trading partner, and surely we'll start seeing an increase.
Okay, thank you. I don't know why you were worried about that, and I felt like you just gave us a very clear breakdown right there. Thank you so much for that. That was Michael Kimathi and Maz Masai on Metropole Business Center. Thank you so much, guys, for making time to join me here today.
Thank you for having us.
Great.
Thank you for having us.
Now, on that note, we come to the end of Metropole Business Center. Catch me next time on Friday. As for now, guys, enjoy the rest of your morning.